Lisa. It's great to
Hi,
connect. Thanks for making time to meet with me today on this video conference.
absolutely.
I'm going to be asking you a lot of questions, and that's so that my team and I can get a better sense of the need for this training effort and the people it's going to serve. Uh, I want to first dive into the background for your initial request for this training.
hmm
Then we'll discuss the performance requirements. And then towards the end, we'll finally talk about the learner population. I think this will take, depending on how much we talk, somewhere between 30 minutes and an hour. Is that okay by you?
Sure, yeah.
Cool. And we also know that we're doing this interview online rather than in your office.
Right.
I need to confess that my questions are on this screen over here, and my meeting with you is on this screen over here. So if you see me shifting back and forth, that's because I'm trying to keep track of my meeting interview notes and also talk with you at the same time.
No problem. I kind of have a couple of screens over here too.
Okay, we'll make this work. We are trained professionals.
Awesome.
So in addition, to be sure I capture what you say accurately and completely, I want to record this interview. Will that be okay by you?
Yes.
All right, then let's go and start. I want to begin by getting a little bit more of an understanding about the background and why you were interested in putting together this training and why you contacted us. So can you tell me a little more about what led up to this request?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew kid care out of my own home. I started 10 years ago, as a in-home daycare provider for my own son and some of my neighbors' children. I had recently earned a bachelor's degree from Boise State University in early childhood education, and I just felt ready to start my own small business. So, of course, there are too few providers here in Boise. So I kept having to turn children away and families away, even after just opening my business for only a few months. So within 3 years, I decided to open my first daycare center, large daycare center. And 2 years after that, I opened the second site. So now Kid Care is a mid-sized childcare chain with 6 centers located throughout Boise. Each center has a supervisor who oversees 3 to 5 childcare assistants. In the past, one of the supervisor's duties was to provide first aid before arranging transportation to the emergency room or urgent care. But now, by law, all daycare providers must complete pediatric first aid training before or within the first couple of months of their employment. And everyone must be retrained every year to keep their first aid skills fresh. So as president of Kid Care, I'm sponsoring a training program that would allow these supervisors to teach the annual refresher training to the daycare providers on how to wrap injured ankles. I will be your client. We used to hire the American Red Cross to implement their training for our employees, but now we know that we can run our own for less cost.
And what is it that you want these supervisors to be doing that they're not doing now?
Well, we want them to implement ankle wrapping training. Ankle wrapping is part of a larger first aid training effort that we're undertaking. There will be other training similar for similar first aid skills that will need to be developed later. We must also certify that our staff are able to perform basic first aid as a first aid responder. Or as a first responder. And in the past, as I said, we used the American Red Cross to deliver this training. But now we've decided that it makes more sense to have our own supervisors conduct the training. We've never required our staff to have demonstrated the ability to train other adults in ankle wrapping. We have selected the supervisors and daycare providers based on having a current first aid certification and have had the Red Cross implement their recertification courses previously.
And so if you were to summarize what the daycare supervisors are doing now?
Up to now, the supervisors have not implemented the ankle wrapping training.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and can you tell me a little bit about Kid Care's mission and how closing this gap would help meet that mission?
Sure. Our mission is to provide high quality childcare that meets the needs of each child and family in a safe, respectful, and educational environment.
Oh, that's a pretty cool mission.
Yeah,
I like that. That's simple, it's direct, and it says why you exist.
thank you. We
Uh,
spent a lot of time on that.
so, how does the ankle wrapping gap align with any strategic initiatives Kid Care is pursuing now?
Right. So, one of our strategic goals is to create a stimulating childcare setting to facilitate robust social, cognitive, and physical development. Our young clients are super active most of the day. And during the time that they spend with us, they climb, they walk, they run, they jump. They're learning and refining a really wide variety of motor skills. And having supervisors who can train daycare providers who are then able to care for the children in case of an injury, that helps us demonstrate our ability to meet our mission and goals.
Sure. And what about this ankle wrapping gap is keeping you up at night? How would closing it benefit you and the other folks at Kid Care?
So I must demonstrate exemplary performance during audits to earn my annual bonus. And of course, this bonus pays for my child's high quality education. And so that's how it affects me personally. Cost savings will mean that we can hire more experienced staff, which is always our goal. Because more experienced and better staff means a better program for the children and families. Better programs mean our reputation increases, and we then attract more board members who are willing to put their reputations on the line. They are all community leaders with a strong public presence, and our organization has been then able to attract more champions if the quality and reputation of our program as it increases and as it is it's just high quality. So a more powerful board always leads to more influence in the community. And this means we then attract more customers and we're able to grow in our market share.
All right, I'd like to switch gears a little bit. And
Sure.
how often do you think the daycare supervisors will need to be wrapping ankles on injured kids?
So our records show that we have had to wrap ankles no more than once or twice a year for an ankle injury. Thank goodness.
Thank goodness.
Right.
One way we can help people do things in the workplace is to provide guidance and we could create a step-by-step cheat sheet or a job aid, and it could provide instructions and illustrations about how to do this. You know, we use those in recipes. We use those, you know, when we assemble something from IKEA. And it could be, you know, something for ankle wrapping could be one of several of these cheat sheets, these job aids that could maybe appear in some sort of printed or online binder. If your supervisors had the job aid and nothing else, could they train others to wrap ankles well enough so that you could get injured kids, say, to the emergency room?
Right. So the job aid could be definitely helpful, but supervisors would probably need more to be comfortable performing this task. They may not want to use a job aid without some sort of initial training and a facilitator guide. Also, the organization must demonstrate that these people are trained and competent at performing these skills. So we'll need some sort of qualification test too.
And is ankle wrapping hard enough to warrant training? And especially training that would involve things like, here's a demonstration, here's some practice, here's some coaching, here's some feedback.
Yes, we want a program that matches the industry standards. Our Chief Health and Safety Officer reports that industry standard certifications for basic first aid and first responders include demonstrations, practice, coaching, and feedback. Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned a qualification test. So the task is important enough to warrant this kind of a qualification, a mastery test. That means supervisors would actually have to show you that they could teach others who are then able to wrap an ankle well enough for transport, right?
Yes, our Chief Health and Safety Officer reports that industry standard certifications for basic first aid responders should also include a mastery test.
Okay. Training these supervisors to teach others to wrap ankles by memory, meaning that they're not referring to a cheat sheet or a lesson plan, is another possibility. So, we just train them up so that they're able to do this without referring to anything else. Mm-hmm. Training to that kind of memory would require additional training time and probably refresher training to ensure that they can continue performing this task from memory. Would training to memory like that be worth the time and expense for you and the organization?
No, because no one will remember how to do the first aid after one day of training unless maybe you did the training every month, which is cost prohibitive for us. And not worth the time that we need to invest either. So if the supervisors only implement the training once a year and the providers only wrap the ankles once or twice a year, there's a significant risk that they will not remember how to do it correctly. So we do post job aids for AEDs and CPR in key locations because my Chief Health and Safety Officer reports that in her experience, these skills, while not complex, are not used regularly enough. So most people forget what they learned by the time we bring them back for the yearly refresher training. So the cost of doing this ourselves is less than the cost of hiring the Red Cross.
Okay. Want to spend some time diving into the characteristics of that ankle wrapping task. Mm-hmm. What do they wrap the ankle in?
They wrap that ankle in an ACE bandage.
Okay. And when they're wrapping that ankle, what's the main goal for that task? I know they need to wrap the ankle, but there's got to be more.
Yeah, so the goal is to support the injury and minimize the risk of additional injury. Yeah, that's really the goal so that we can transport them to urgent care or the ER or wherever they need to go.
Okay, yeah, and that would be the difference between something I'd wrap up and what your supervisor should be able to wrap at the end of this training.
Hope so.
What are the cues that trigger the performance of this task?
Sure. There will be a child with an injured ankle needing support.
And you mentioned an ACE bandage. Are there any other resources that people use to complete this task?
Yes, they use the ACE bandage. They also use the clips for securing the bandage. And they would use a first aid binder if they needed to. It should just be available.
And you've told me a little bit about the standards that the task should meet. Could you revisit those one more time so I'm sure I understand?
Yeah, so we need them to wrap the ankle securely enough to transport the child to either ER or urgent care, but not to wrap the ankle so tightly as to restrict blood flow either.
Oh yeah, that would be bad, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of a Goldilocks situation.
Sure, exactly. How long does it take to wrap an ankle?
A minute to 2 minutes, I think, most of the time, depending on how upset the child is. There might be some consoling that goes into that too.
And I think you told me that people would need to do this about 1 or 2 times a year.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, you've got that right.
And what kind of skills should they already have? What should they be able to do already before they start looking at wrapping ankles?
Yeah, so they need to be able to keep calm in a crisis. That's where the training comes in. And they need to know how to use an instructor guide to deliver training. At least the supervisors do.
Right, because it's not just about wrapping the ankles. It's teaching the people who are going to be wrapping the ankles.
Right, absolutely.
So having looked at those broad characteristics, I want to learn a little bit more about the supervisors who are going to be the learners for this training package. There are a few questions that I'd like to ask about them. Is that going to be okay?
Absolutely. Actually, I appreciate that. Some of the providers we've worked with in the past didn't bother to ask about our people, and we are very proud, actually, to be a highly diverse organization. We serve a very diverse group of clients as well. And so one of the reasons I picked your consulting firm to work with was because you prioritize an importance for respecting diverse learners' needs.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So let's learn a little bit more about them. What's the age range and the average age of the supervisors and then the daycare providers themselves?
The supervisors are mostly between 45 and 65 years old. The providers range themselves between 20 and 50 years old, with most of them being about 23 years old.
Okay, and what genders do your providers and supervisors identify with, and how would you see them represented in the training?
Great question. I do want the training to look like our organization, the people who work here, as well as the kids that we care for and their parents. So most of our supervisors and providers are women, although approximately 20% of our employees are male. They all prefer binary pronouns.
And one female is transgender.
Our parents are also very diverse. Some families have single parents, either a mom or a dad. Other families have 2 moms or 2 dads, and maybe split households. So that happens too, where our children are traveling between different families who may or may not themselves be blended. And so that all needs to be, we need to make sure that these materials, again, respect our population that we serve.
Yes, and you're in a business that's characterized by a whole lot of diversity.
Absolutely.
So how would we best celebrate that diverse set of cultural backgrounds of your people in training materials that we produce?
Well, approximately 30% of our staff are former refugees. Some came 5 years ago, while others came when they were children, and then they're now adult U.S. citizens. Those who are or were refugees originated from Bosnia, Romania, Yemen, Rwanda, and Iraq. 20% of our employees are Hispanic, and 20% are Black. Some of those are African Americans. Others grew up in the Caribbean or Rwanda. The rest of our employees are white Americans who are European descendants. Approximately 30% of our employees speak English as a second, third, or fourth language. Lastly, we have 1 deaf employee, and some of our childcare providers have notified us of their state-protected status with learning disabilities. We serve clients who are native to the U.S., our First Peoples who originate from Mexico, Japan, India, Korea, China, Argentina, Egypt, Oman, and Ghana. Our past training has been successful when we've relied on less text, more visuals, use closed captions available to turn on and off.
Yeah, we're seeming to be talking about a global community, and pictures are communicating in a more global way than text.
Absolutely, and we're very proud of that. So thank you for asking.
And what prior education levels have these folks achieved?
So that also varies. At minimum, supervisors have completed their associate degrees in early childhood education. The providers all have either a high school diploma or GED. Some of them have even taken early childhood education courses at the local community colleges or universities or other certification vendors. Our managers have completed 4-year degrees in early childhood development or an equivalent.
What kind of prior experience do they bring with them when they start working with you?
So all of our childcare providers have worked in other organizations previously as childcare providers for at least 2 years. Our supervisors could be brand new in their role or have up to 10 years of supervisory experience, and that's on top of whatever direct childcare provider experience they come in with.
And that gets back to what you were saying before about trying to hire more experienced people. And the more you can hire experienced people, the better your services are. And that relates back to your business model of being a preferred provider.
Absolutely. And we also like to promote from within because we're very proud of our diverse culture and also our organizational culture.
So this is a diverse group of people. To what extent, if you think about them all together, and I know that's dangerous, but if you think about them, to what extent do you think they're going to be willing and able to use any kind of technology in their training?
I'm glad you asked about that too. Our employees have used technology in the past, but we don't have the budget for things like custom e-learning. I would also be concerned whether our employees would have access to technology at our facilities. We don't have a computer lab or an iPad card or anything like that. And their ability to engage with it on their own personal devices, I can't comment on that either. I don't know to what extent that would be an option for them.
Exactly. And how do your people perceive their ability or their availability in terms of having time for learning workplace skills?
So this effort is very important to the organization. We will provide full pay and release time for training on site. We also pride ourselves on serving delicious food at our training events. So employees usually happily show up. And we have a good time together.
Well, and the food thing works.
It does.
So I'd like to learn a little bit more about what they already know. So in particular, what do the supervisors already know about first aid?
They all teach new knowledge skills and attitudes to employees while on the job. They all perform themselves first aid. They don't typically teach first aid to adults in a formal classroom, though. At least they haven't in the past, or we haven't selected them based on their experience in the past doing that. And they don't typically teach first aid to adults in a formal classroom setting in our current situation.
Oh, okay. So this is the difference between I can do this myself and I can do it pretty confidently and well by myself, but I haven't done this with a lot of other folks, especially adult folks, and especially in a formal training situation.
Yes, you're correct. That's exactly a good way to state that.
And what sort of first aid techniques can daycare supervisors already perform?
They can perform everything that's been covered in the American Red Cross First Aid Certification Program.
Right. Okay, I'm back now. You told me that earlier.
Okay.
And so in terms of ankle wrapping, what should they already know and be able to do before they start this ankle wrapping training?
So they should know how to tell if an ankle needs to be wrapped. The cues that would be that a child is upset and pointing to or talking about his or her ankle or foot, or they might be hobbling along. They don't always know the word for ankle, and they're just learning how to communicate their needs verbally. So sometimes it's through observation.
So am I correct in assuming that daycare supervisors then, no, let me backtrack. You've already told me that they're going to have to learn how to teach others to wrap the ankles. Mm-hmm. So I understand that, teaching others to wrap the injured ankles is different than what they've been doing. So can you tell me what's involved in that supervisors will have to be learning in the training?
Yeah, they will need to learn how to facilitate formal classroom instruction for adults.
Okay.
And some of them may have done that before, others, most not though. We don't select for that right now.
And how complex is ankle wrapping compared to the other first aid techniques that the daycare supervisors are going to have to learn and teach?
Well, when I first worked as a daycare provider, I was and I still am certified in first aid, so it all seems pretty simple to me.
Let me ask it a different way to make sure. Is there anything hard about wrapping ankles?
I personally, I don't think there's anything hard, no. And when I go to class with others, when I had to get my certification, no one else seemed to struggle either.
Okay. And is there, so it isn't necessarily that hard. Is there anything critical or complex about it?
Yeah, so it's critical that you apply pressure, but don't cut off circulation. You can check your work by squeezing a toe to see if, the blood comes back to it. If you can see through the skin gets red again. Okay, sure. It's hard to complete the job if the child is scared or in pain.
Oh, and so the ankle wrapping isn't hard, but working with the child who's in pain is the hard part.
It's, hard is a big word. For me, that's the most challenging part, is seeing a child who's, in distress.
Okay. So want to look a little bit at some of the environmental factors, the larger context in which all of the training and then the learning and the performing occurs.
Sure.
So how do the daycare supervisors feel about teaching others to, wrap the ankles of these injured kids?
Yeah, so the few that I've talked to about it are very accepting and open to this responsibility.
So you think it's something they'd embrace instead of being something they'd be scared of?
Yeah, they're helpers by nature. They like to help people out. So I think this is just one more way they can serve others.
And you told me earlier they had first aid training before. Is there any other relevant training they've completed, and how do they feel about this other training?
So they have had first aid training before. They want to provide high quality care, and they accept this as a component of that service.
Okay. And so we've talked a little bit about how they might feel about this. Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about where this actually might be happening. So where do you think they'll be completing the training to learn how to deliver this, and where will people complete their training for the ankle wrapping?
So everyone should complete the training on our annual teacher training days, which happen about once or twice a year.
Oh, so you bring people into a centralized facility and do it there, or is it happening in each of the facilities?
It will happen in each of the facilities. That's why we're getting multiple supervisors trained.
Yeah, and it's nice when you have a big area already, you can repurpose it easily for your internal training.
Yeah, that's what we do. We shut down the services for our clients a couple times a year so that we can keep our staff fresh and up to date.
And so what sort of classroom materials and equipment would Kid Care be using in the training?
We will use bandages in our classrooms on site. Every site has a first aid kit that is kept stocked. And then we will have separate training materials that we'll reuse every year.
Okay. And I want to look a little bit at the last context, and that's the link between what they learn in the training and what they're actually going to be doing on the job, and the extent to which the job supports that transfer from, the training environment to the workplace. Mm-hmm. So to whom do your supervisors report?
They report to the site managers, and there's one site manager per location.
Okay, and to what extent would the site managers support their supervisors using an ankle wrapping job aid, the cheat sheet we were talking about?
So our Chief Health and Safety Officer has asked for job aids. The child care workers themselves, providers, have not asked for anything. The ankle wrapping cheat sheet would be part of a first aid binder that we would house in each of our facilities. We're envisioning something that's easy to use and readily available. We would expect our supervisors to use the job aids if needed, as needed. If they're wrapping an ankle after they just got trained last week, probably don't need them, but maybe 10 months down the road might come in useful.
And should that happen and someone's referring to the job aid, they're not going to get in trouble. They're actually doing what they're expected to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Safety is the first priority.
And to what extent would these site managers be willing and able to provide feedback and support after the training to make sure that supervisors are applying what they learned back in the, back on the job?
Right. So eventually, the site managers will also be trainers. The supervisors will be trainers immediately. So the site manager would debrief with, or the site supervisor would, the site manager would debrief with a supervisor or even a child care provider anytime they submit an accident report and provide feedback at that time. The site manager will maintain bandage stocks and reassign duties if a manager or child care worker needs to give first aid for an ankle injury.
Yeah, that's great, because it's really important that the site manager, the supervisor, and the child care providers are all aligned in this.
Yeah, we're all on one team.
All on one team is a good thing.
Absolutely.
I wanted to thank you. I've come to the end of my questions. Are there any more questions you have of me?
So what are going to be our next steps?
Well, we've got this information. You've also provided us with a video from YouTube where a nurse is demonstrating how to wrap ankles.
Yeah, yep.
We're going to do a deep dive into both of those, and we're going to represent both of these sources in a way that we can use it later to design and then create the training materials.
Oh,
so,
okay.
A lot of what we're talking about today is going to come into a deliverable that was in our proposal called a learner and environmental analysis, which is a high-end consulting term for who's going to be in the training and what are the contextual factors that the training's going to need to address.
Okay.
You're also going to get a deliverable called the task analysis, where we do a deep dive on that ankle wrapping so that we can represent the really cool exemplary stuff that the nurse is doing
Oh,
in
yeah.
a way that your people are going to be able to act more like that nurse.
Okay. Yeah, I remember that from our kickoff meeting when we went over the statement of work.
Exactly.
Great.
So you've given us plenty to work with. The last question from me is, I'm sure we're going to have questions as we dig deeper into this. Will it be all right if we contact you as those
Absolutely.
arise?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. I look
And we'll
forward to it.
bundle our questions together so it isn't just one after another after another. We'll, take time to aggregate them and then give them to you.
That's always helpful.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I think we're pretty close to what we estimated, but you've been so gracious with your time and expertise. So thank you, and we'll be in touch.
Well, thank you, Steve. I look forward to working with you.
You too. Bye now.
Have a great day. Bye.